All right, CNT120, Chapter 4, we're on the section on remote access. So remote access allows a client to connect with or log into a server, LAN, devices on a LAN in a different location. And it could just be in the next building, but it could literally be in another building in another city of your company or of your business, if you will. Think about hack. You have Lancaster, Lebanon, York, Gettysburg, Harrisburg. If I'm managing the network, and let's say my office is in Harrisburg, I'm not going to drive to Gettysburg, Lancaster, York, Lebanon all the time unless really necessary. So I might set up some remote access to these different campuses to handle a lot of the basic issues that come up. And that's the kind of thing we're talking about with this section of the chapter. So there is different types of remote access. There's remote file access, there's terminal emulation, and there's virtual private networks. So remote file access is things like FTP, secure FTP, TFTP for sending and receiving files. Your terminal emulation is your things like your Telnet SSH, remote desktop VNC for taking over a client or working on a client in a remote location. And then VPN is literally a virtual connection into the network over typically internet type connection, but an encrypted connection over that to resources at your company or at another site. So remote file access, things like FTP, TFTP, that sort of thing. I can send, receive, upload, download data from one location to another. Now, by default, FTP itself is not secure. It doesn't encrypt the data transmission. So in many cases, years ago, you used to upload new files to a web server using FTP. But that, in many cases, is not used anymore because that sending of the data is not encrypted. You can actually see those logins and everything else during that process. Well, let's see if we can try to show that. And again, this is all in the name of learning. We're not hacking in anywhere. So let me try a new Wireshark session here. I'm going to try a new Wireshark session. There we go. I'm going to get going with this. Oop, let me clear that out. I don't want to filter anything in particular. I'm going to open up my command prompt. Let's clear my screen. And I'm going to try to open up an FTP session to a test site. We want to do open. We want to do our test.rebex.net. This is a test site you can use to test out protocols. And I'm going to do, let's see, I think it is demo and password. Demo and password. And I will just do a directory here. Yay, look, there's a public directory. And I'm just going to close and quit because I don't actually need to do anything here. I just wanted to generate the FTP traffic. So let's stop our capture and let's see if we can filter out and just see the FTP traffic. And I do. All right. So here's my FTP traffic. Well, what we want to see is there is FTP. Here's Ethernet, IP, TCP, FTP. So hopefully remember from before, anything moving data, moving files, if you will, would need the reliability of TCP. So there it is. And then here's my FTP. Well, let's see if we can show us logging in to the FTP server. So I'm going to try to start scrolling down through FTP here to see if we can see the actual data that we're using. There's demo for the username. And now let's go password for the password. Okay. I'm logged on. So right there, I didn't even have to look hard. Here was the username demo logged in. And then up here was the password typed in. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. It's not hard to capture this data because it is transferred in clear text, which is one of the reasons they say about your file access that is not secure. So things like FTP secure, FTP over SSL can be used for these purposes, adding in the encryption that would be needed to make that login at least secure that you could not capture and learn login passwords, that sort of thing. TFTP is a simple version of FTP, and this actually we do use 125 when we start doing router config and switch config in the network. Later on in the network, I show students how to use TFTP to save their configurations for backup purposes, and that's exactly what we have here. Router switch config for either backup or even booting. I can actually have the router switch boot up and pull its config from a TFTP server, and that TFTP server would need to be on the network and communicating with those routers and switches, and that is basically a very small text file with the commands in for the router, IP addresses, ports, that sort of thing. Real basic file, and TFTP can be used for that. So there's your file access. Now, terminal emulation. Terminal emulation is I'm remotely connecting into something as if I would be sitting there, as if I would be sitting in the closet with it. So normally when we configure stuff, we take our laptop in the closet, plug into the router switch, and do our configuration commands. Well, once I set up some remote access, I can be in my office in Harrisburg and remotely connect to a router or switch in Lancaster, Lebanon, and potentially work on it, make changes, update things, maybe take pieces out, and I would not have to drive there. And I would be using things like Telnet, SSH, etc. So here is some examples of terminal emulation, Telnet, SSH, but then also GUI versions, remote desktop, VNC, TeamViewer, that sort of thing. So Telnet, this was kind of the first one that got used, text-based remote access. This, again, is not clear. Everything's transported in clear text. And I would use a command line or a program like PuTTY to do command line and connect into a resource. But again, this is not secure. So let's try we're going to try our capture again. Let's try a new capture. I'll clear this out. Again, this is all in the name of learning. Let's start a new capture. And I'm going to try to telnet to telehack.com. Oops. Let me try it to, is it telehack.com? Yeah, it is telehack.com. Let's try it this way then. I'm going to use my PuTTY application here. Let's go telnet, and we'll do telehack.com. And we will open that connection there. There we go. There's my telehack connection. And we're going to run the program called Star Wars. So we'll let Star Wars run here for a couple seconds, and you'll see that it's actually doing a ASCII version of the Star Wars movie. There's the intro scene. There is the scroll of the intro. And then eventually the little ship and everything will come across the screen. So we'll let this run for just a minute. But there is, I'm remoting into the server and running a program, and it's printing out the intro to Star Wars on the screen for me. And then here's your planet. Then here should be the little ambassador ship coming in, and then the Imperial cruiser and so forth. All right, you get the idea. All right, I'm going to close that out. I'm going to close that session out. Let's go here to our Wireshark, and we'll stop. And we're going to try to filter for Telnet. And what we want to see, here's our Telnet data from me to that resource. And again, here is TCP. We're using TCP because we need reliable. Let's open up our data field, and we're going to try to scroll down through here. And we're going to scroll down through and see some of our... Okay, here we go. Here's our login. Actually, there's the Star Wars command, STARWARS. There's the Star Wars command. And then here is that intro. So everything I'm typing in Telnet, again, is clear text if you capture the data. Again, one of the reasons you don't use Telnet for remote access. Everything is transferred in clear text. Which brings us to SSH. SSH is a secure encrypted version of what we just did with Telnet. Depends on the version. You have DS, triple DES, AES, so forth, RSA, that is used to encrypt this communication. Excuse me. Things like PuTTY will use or have the ability to use SSH, and typically are going to use port 22. So if I run PuTTY now, and I'll do that now, let's try to test to I'll use my Rebex site as before. Let me open up my PuTTY, and I'm going to do SSH, and notice the port number changes to 22. This Wireshark, we need to capture this session. Let's close this out. Let's open up a new one here. All right, then we go back to my PuTTY, and we're going to do test.rebex.net. And we will try to log in this way. And we need to log in as demo and password, I'm pretty sure. There we go. And I could do a directory here. Looks like there's a public directory, so I'll do a change into that. I'll do a list here. Yay! Okay, so then I will quit, close, quit, and I forget what exactly it was. Or we'll just close that out. That's good enough for now. So let's go over here, and we're going to look at our SSH traffic. Now, if we try to search for SSH, sometimes we get it, sometimes we don't. Here we do. Here is our SSH version 2, and you'll see right off the bat, client protocol, key exchange, okay? But let's look at one of the headers. Again, we're seeing TCP, because we need the reliable data transfer, and here's the SSH protocol. Here's the server key exchange, the client key exchange, the encrypted packets. So now if I look at one of these encrypted packets, here is the actual data, but it's encrypted. So I can see the SSH traffic. I can capture it and open it up and look at it, but now everything that I'm typing and transferring back and forth is encrypted, which again is, if we're going to remote into something using a command like we just said, it's most likely going to be SSH. That's what we configure in our equipment in our lab rooms as we're doing that. A GUI version of your remote access can be something like RDP, a remote desktop protocol. On the server, you can enable, or your device, you can enable remote access, and then I would use the little application to plug in the IP of that that device to remote in. And again, I might use that to remote into a server and plug accounts in or change accounts, then log out. But if we're thinking security, anything we do, any remote connection we do, I have a port open, so that is a vulnerability. And that would be something you have to weigh of, like, is that okay to have? Is that okay to deal with? But you might actually do some security on top of that to limit who has access to it, from where, using what IP, etc. And then obviously having strong passwords, not the ones that we're using here in our demos. And then we also have VNC. VNC would be another version of, it's an open source version of basically RDP, where I can remote in to the device using the IP and work on it as if I would be sitting there, as I'd be sitting in front of the device. Last but not least is management using your browser. So something like your homeowner router, you browse into it through, you put the IP address up in the browser, and you browse into it, and I can do some pointing and clicking here to manage my device. Some devices in your network, you can do this. You'll need to configure it and allow that, but you can then browse in and do this instead of typing the commands. It's a little bit more visual. But again, you would need to do some security of allowing only certain devices or certain things to connect into it. They talk about out-of-band management. Out-of-band is these guys right here all rely on existing network infrastructure or connection. So there has to be a legit connection for you to make it to connect to it. Out-of-band is when I don't have that connection, I need to go to the closet, open my laptop, and connect in things like console ports. And I'm literally using my laptop and a connection directly into it to work on it. That is your out-of-band management. And another backup method could be, I literally have something like a phone modem that connects into an auxiliary port, allowing me to remotely connect to it when we have a power outage or something, or I should say a data outage. And I can hopefully still get to this by going into the closet and plugging in, or connecting through something like a phone line. So there's some remote access.